Emma leaned against the kitchen counter, the warm scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. She watched Jack from across the room as he packed his travel bag. His movements were deliberate, methodical, exactly like him. She smiled, though her chest felt tight. "Do you really have to go?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with worry. Jack looked up, his hazel eyes meeting hers. "Emma, we've talked about this. It's a big project. If I nail this, it could mean a promotion, maybe even that dream cabin we keep talking about." She crossed her arms, leaning further against the counter. "I know, I know. It's just Alaska? Couldn't they have picked somewhere warmer or safer?" Jack chuckled, zipping his bag and walking over to her. "You're acting like I'm heading into the wild with nothing but a backpack and a can of beans." "Well, aren't you?" Emma quipped, raising an eyebrow. "Close, but I'll also have Wi-Fi and room service," he teased, wrapping his arms around her. His tone softened. "I'll be fine, Em. It's just a week. I'll be back before you know it." Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "You better be. Our anniversary is coming up, and I've got plans." "Oh, do you now?" Jack tilted her chin up with a playful grin. "Are these the kind of plans that involve candles and overpriced wine?" "Maybe," she said, smirking. "Or maybe I'll just binge-watch crime dramas and eat all the snacks without you." "Cruel," Jack laughed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Now I have to come back." Despite their laughter, Emma couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. Jack had traveled for work before, but something about this trip felt different. She brushed the thought away. Jack was right. It was only a week. What could go wrong? Later that evening, they sat together on the couch, the flicker of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. Jack had an early flight, but neither of them mentioned it. Instead, they talked about everything and nothing, their conversations weaving between playful banter and quiet moments of connection. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Emma broke the silence. "Promise me something." Jack turned to her, his expression serious. "Anything. Promise me you'll call. Every day. Even if it's just for a minute." Jack reached for her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "I promise. Every day." The next morning, the goodbye was brief but heartfelt. Jack kissed her one last time before stepping into the taxi. Emma stood at the door, watching until the car disappeared down the street. For the rest of the day, she kept herself busy, writing, gardening, cleaning, but the house felt unbearably quiet without him. That night, she sat by the fireplace with her laptop, Chuck glancing at her phone every few minutes. True to his promise, Jack called. "Made it to Anchorage," he said. His voice was warm, reassuring. The flight was smooth, no wild bears at the airport. Emma laughed, rolling her eyes. "Good to know. Call me tomorrow?" "Of course. Sleep well, Em?" "You too. Love you. Love you more." She hung up, feeling lighter. Maybe this trip wouldn't be so bad after all. But as the days passed, that uneasy feeling lingered, cue a quiet whisper in the back of her mind. Something was coming. She just didn't know what. The ringing phone cut through the quiet hum of the morning. Emma reached for it, her heart skipping when she saw the unknown number. She hesitated, then pressed accept. "Hello? Mrs. Taylor?" The voice on the other end was calm but clipped, professional. "Yes, this is she. Who's calling?" "This is Dana Caldwell from Northern Air. I'm afraid there's been an incident with Flight 732. Emma's breath hitched. What kind of incident? The plane encountered severe weather conditions en route to Seattle. It lost contact with air traffic control just outside Anchorage. Her mind went blank for a moment, the words failing to sink in. Lost contact? What does that mean? Did it crash? We're still gathering information, Dana said carefully. The last known location was near a remote mountain range. Search and rescue teams have been deployed. Emma's fingers tightened around the phone. You're telling me my husband's plane is missing and you don't know if he's alive? There was a pause. I understand how difficult this must be, Mrs. Taylor. We'll update you as soon as we know more. The line went dead before Emma could respond. She stood frozen, the weight of the conversation settling over her like a heavy blanket. Jack, her Jack, missing. The day passed in a blur of calls and unanswered questions. Friends and family reached out, their concern only amplifying her growing dread. By evening, Emma was pacing the living room, her mind running in circles. She dialed the airline again, demanding answers, but the response was the same. No news yet. She finally called her best friend, Claire. I can't just sit here, Emma said, her voice trembling. He's out there somewhere, and I'm doing nothing. What can you do, Em? Claire asked gently. The search teams are professionals. You need to let them handle it. Emma's grip on the phone tightened. I can't just wait, Claire. That's not who I am. Okay, Claire said after a pause. What's the plan? Emma hadn't thought that far, but the idea was already forming in her mind. She needed to go to Alaska. If Jack was out there, she had to be closer to him, to the place where the search was happening. The next morning, Emma booked the earliest flight she could find. By afternoon, she was on her way to Anchorage. The cold, crisp air bit at her face as she stepped off the plane, but she barely noticed. Her focus was singular: find Jack. At the small airport terminal, she approached the information desk. I need to speak to someone about Flight 1732. The woman behind the counter gave her a sympathetic look. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no new information yet. I need to go to the last known location, Emma insisted. Who can take me there? The woman hesitated. It's not safe. The area is remote, and the weather? I don't care about the weather, Emma snapped. My husband is out there. Someone has to help me. A man standing nearby, his face weathered and framed by a gray beard, turned toward her. You won't find many willing to go out there in this storm, he said, his voice low and steady. But I might. Emma's eyes locked on him. You might? He nodded. Name's Sam. Used to be a ranger in these parts. I know the terrain. Will you take me? Sam studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp. You don't look like someone who's used to roughing it. I'm not, Emma admitted. But I don't care. I need to find my husband. He let out a long breath. It won't be easy, or cheap. Money doesn't matter, Emma said quickly. Just tell me when we leave. Sam tipped his hat. Sunrise tomorrow. Be ready. Emma nodded, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. As she walked out into the cold Alaskan night, she felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, but she also felt something else, a determination that burned brighter than the fear. She wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. The sky was still dark when Emma arrived at the meeting spot, her breath visible in the frigid air. Sam was already there, leaning against a battered truck with a steaming thermos in hand. He gave her a once-over as she approached, bundled in layers of mismatched cold-weather gear. You sure about this? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Most people would wait for professionals. Emma met his gaze, her voice steady. I'm not most people. He smirked, impressed. Figured as much. Handing her a cup of coffee, he motioned to the truck. Climb in. We've got a long ride ahead. The drive was silent at first, the hum of the engine the only sound. The landscape outside was breathtaking, endless expanses of snow and towering mountains. But Emma barely noticed. Her mind was on Jack, on what he might be going through, on whether he was even... Stop that, Sam said suddenly, breaking the silence. Emma turned to him, startled. Stop what? Thinking the worst, he said gruffly. I've seen plenty of survival stories in my time. People are tougher than you think. Emma frowned, hugging the thermos close. What if? No what ifs, Sam cut her off. Not until you've got proof. Focus on what you can do right now. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. He was right. Worry wouldn't help Jack, but action might. Hours later, they reached the edge of a dense forest. Sam parked the truck and began unloading supplies. Backpacks, a tent, and what looked like enough gear to survive for weeks. Emma stepped out, shivering as the cold hit her full force. This is where the road ends, Sam said, strapping on his pack. From here, it's all on foot. Emma nodded, slipping on the snowshoes he handed her. The first few steps were clumsy, but she quickly adjusted. Sam led the way, moving with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime in the wilderness. Emma followed, determined not to slow him down. As they trekked deeper into the forest, the trees closed in around them, their branches heavy with snow. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps. Emma's thoughts drifted to Jack, picturing him out here, alone. Was he cold? Hurt? Did he even know she was coming for him? Tell me about him, Sam said unexpectedly, glancing over his shoulder. Jack? Emma asked, surprised. Yeah. What kind of guy makes you crazy enough to pull a stunt like this? Emma smiled faintly. He's steady, the kind of person who always keeps his promises. He's smart, funny in this quiet way, and he's stubborn. God, he's stubborn. But it's one of the things I love about him. Sam nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like someone worth fighting for. He is, Emma said firmly. He'd do the same for me. They walked in silence for a while after that, the weight of her words hanging between them. As the afternoon wore on, the weather began to shift. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the sky darkened ominously. Sam stopped, scanning the horizon. Storm's coming. Emma's stomach tightened. What does that mean? It means we need to set up camp before it hits, he said, already unpacking the tent. We'll wait it out here. Emma helped as best she could, her hands clumsy from the cold. By the time they had the tent secured, snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes. They huddled inside, the small space filled with the sharp scent of wet fabric and propane from Sam's heater. The wind roared outside, shaking the tent. Emma wrapped her arms around her knees, trying not to think about Jack out there in this. Sam handed her a cup of soup, his expression softer than before. Don't lose hope, he said quietly. I've seen worse storms than this, and people still come out the other side. Emma nodded, but her chest ached with worry. She stared into the steaming cup, her mind a storm of its own. Jack was out there somewhere, and she had to find him, no matter what it took. The storm raged through the night, the wind slamming against the tent with a ferocity that made Emma's nerves fray. She barely slept, each howl of the wind pulling her thoughts back to Jack. She clutched the locket around her neck, the small picture of them inside a reminder of why she couldn't give up. By dawn, the wind had eased, leaving a still, eerie silence in its wake. Sam poked his head out of the tent, scanning the snow-covered landscape. Storms passed, he said gruffly. We'll make up for lost time today. Emma was already lacing her boots. Let's go. The fresh snow made the trek more difficult. Each step sank deep into the ground, slowing their progress. Emma's legs ached, but she pushed forward, fueled by sheer determination. Sam kept a steady pace ahead of her, his experience showing in the way he read the terrain. Every so often, he would stop, checking their bearings against a weathered map and compass. Around midday, they reached a clearing where the trees thinned, offering a clear view of the mountains ahead. Sam raised a hand, signaling Emma to stop. Look, he said, pointing toward the ridge. Emma squinted, following his gaze. Her breath caught. In the distance, half buried in snow, was what looked like a piece of wreckage. That's part of the plane, isn't it? She asked, her voice trembling. Sam nodded grimly. Could be, but it's a good sign. Means we're getting close. Her heart pounded as they made their way toward the debris. It was slow going, the deep snow and uneven terrain making every step a struggle. When they finally reached the wreckage, Emma's chest tightened. A section of the fuselage lay mangled, its metal twisted and charred. Jack? She called, her voice echoing in the silence. Jack, are you here? No answer. Sam crouched by the wreckage, examining the ground. There are tracks, he said, motioning for her to come closer. Someone moved away from here recently. Emma knelt beside him, her gloved hand brushing against the faint prints in the snow. You think it's him? Could be, Sam said, but these prints aren't deep. Whoever it was, they're not carrying much. That's good. It means they're moving fast. Emma's pulse quickened. Then we need to follow them. Sam hesitated, glancing at the sky. The clouds were thickening again, a warning of another storm brewing. Emma, listen, he said, his tone cautious. If we push too hard and that storm hits, we're risking both our lives. We need to be smart about this. She stared at him, frustration bubbling in her chest. Jack doesn't have time for us to be cautious. He could be hurt. He could be. Alive, Sam interrupted firmly. He's alive, or these tracks wouldn't be here. But if we go down, who's going to find him then? Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. He was right, as much as she hated to admit it. So what do? We follow the tracks, Sam said, standing and adjusting his pack. But carefully. If the storm rolls in, we stop. No arguments. She nodded, though her jaw clenched. Every second felt like an eternity, but she knew they couldn't afford mistakes. They set off again, following the faint trail through the snow. The tracks wove between trees and up gentle inclines, each step taking them closer to the mountains. Emma's hope grew with every sign of movement. A broken branch here, a disturbed patch of snow there. Jack was alive. He had to be. As the afternoon wore on, the wind began to pick up again, swirling snow into the air. The tracks became harder to follow, forcing Sam to stop frequently and reassess. Emma felt her patience wearing thin, but she bit her tongue, knowing he was doing his best. Finally, they reached a sheltered grove where the tracks seemed to converge. Sam crouched again, studying the ground. Whoever it is, they stopped here for a while, he said, probably to rest. Emma's heart leapt. Then we're close. Sam held up a hand, silencing her. His sharp gaze darted toward the trees. For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then Emma heard it, a faint rustling, like someone moving through the underbrush. Jack? She called, her voice cracking. The rustling stopped. Sam stood, his hand hovering near the knife at his belt. Careful, he muttered. Could be anything. Emma ignored him, taking a step forward. Jack, it's me! Emma! There was a long pause. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, unsteady and wrapped in a tattered blanket. Emma's breath caught as she recognized the face beneath the frostbitten cheeks and hollow eyes. Jack, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He looked at her, his expression dazed. Emma? His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. How are you here? She ran to him, wrapping her arms around him, the cold biting through her gloves and coat. I found you, she choked out, holding him tightly. I found you. Jack leaned against her, his weight heavy but familiar. I thought I was dreaming, he murmured. I didn't think anyone would come. Emma pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. I'll always come for you, always. Sam stepped forward, his voice gruff but kind. Let's get him warm. We've got a long way back. Emma nodded, her resolve renewed. She wasn't letting go of Jack again. No matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. Jack's weight was heavier than Emma expected as she and Sam helped him back toward their makeshift camp. He stumbled frequently, his legs weak from exhaustion and cold. Emma kept her arm firmly around him, her heart breaking at how frail he felt. Just a little further, she said softly, glancing at Sam. Are we close? Not far, Sam replied, his voice steady. We'll make it. Jack's head lolled against her shoulder, his breath shallow. Emma, how did you even? His voice was hoarse, barely audible. Shh, she whispered, tightening her grip on him. I'll explain everything later. Just focus on putting one foot in front of the other. Jack gave a weak chuckle. You always so stubborn. Look who's talking, she replied, her eyes stinging with tears. I learned from the best. The wind was picking up again, biting through their layers as the sun began to dip behind the mountains. Sam stopped abruptly, scanning the horizon. Storm's moving in faster than I thought. We need to pick up the pace. Emma glanced at him, panic flickering in her chest. Can he handle it? He's so weak. Sam frowned, his eyes sharp as they flicked between Jack and the distant clouds. He doesn't have a choice, and neither do we. We'll take turns supporting him, but we can't stop now. Not with that storm rolling in. I'm fine, Jack croaked, trying to stand straighter, though his knees buckled almost immediately. Just keep going. You're not fine, Emma snapped, catching him before he fell. And you don't have to pretend to be. Just let us help you. Sam nodded in approval. She's right. Save your strength for walking. They pressed on, the wind growing more ferocious with each passing minute. Emma's muscles burned from the effort of supporting Jack, but she refused to stop. She kept whispering encouragements to him, her voice a steady rhythm in the chaos of the storm. When they finally reached the grove where they'd set up camp, Sam dropped his pack and began working quickly to secure the tent. Emma guided Jack inside, helping him sit as she pulled blankets around his shivering frame. Stay with me, Jack, she said urgently, her hands cupping his frozen cheeks. You're going to be okay. I've got you. He blinked up at her, his lips cracked and pale. You shouldn't have come. Don't you dare say that, Emma said fiercely, her voice breaking. Don't you dare. I'd cross the entire world if it meant finding you. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Always the fighter. Damn right, she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. And you're going to fight too. Do you hear me? You don't get to give up. Sam ducked into the tent, shaking snow from his coat. Storm's closing in fast. We'll ride it out here, but we need to get him warm now or he's not going to make it. Emma nodded, her heart racing. What do we do? Sam pulled a small heating pack from his gear and handed it to her. Start with this. Keep him as close to you as possible. Body heat's the fastest way. She hesitated for only a moment before climbing under the blankets beside Jack, wrapping her arms around him. He was ice cold, his body trembling violently against hers. You're freezing, she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. Guess I forgot how to pack for Alaska, he murmured weakly. a hint of his old humor breaking through. Emma laughed shakily, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead. You always were terrible at packing. Sam busied himself with securing it and preparing a small meal, his movements efficient and calm. We'll stay here until morning, he said. If the storm lets up, we can head back. He's lucky you found him when you did. Emma looked down at Jack, her chest tightening. No, I'm the lucky one. Jack's eyes fluttered open, meeting hers. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them. I knew you'd come, he whispered. Emma's throat tightened. And I always will. As the night wore on, she held him close, whispering stories of their life together, reminding him of everything they still had to look forward to. She wouldn't let him slip away. Not now. Not ever. The storm pounded relentlessly against the tent, the howling wind and pelting snow creating a deafening roar. Emma lay awake, cradling Jack in her arms, her body stiff from the cold and tension. His breathing was shallow but steady, his head resting against her chest. She pressed her lips to his temple, whispering softly. Hang on, Jack. Just a little longer. His eyes fluttered open for a brief moment. I'm not going anywhere, he murmured weakly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Not if you keep holding me like this. Emma let out a choked laugh, tears threatening to spill. You're impossible, you know that? Yeah, he whispered, his voice barely audible. But you married me anyway. Sam, sitting by the small camping stove, glanced over at them. How's he doing? He's holding on, Emma said, her voice firm, though her eyes betrayed her fear. But he's so cold. Sam nodded, his weathered face serious. This storm's worse than I thought. We'll wait it out, but as soon as it clears, we move. He won't last another night out here. Emma tightened her grip on Jack. We'll make it. We have to. Hours passed, the storm raging without mercy. Emma drifted in and out of sleep, her exhaustion battling her determination to stay alert. Each time Jack stirred or murmured in his sleep, she was instantly awake, checking his pulse, his temperature, anything to reassure herself he was still fighting. At some point, Sam spoke up. You know, he said, his voice low, you've got more grit than most people I've met. Emma looked up, surprised. What? Coming out here, doing all this? Sam continued, stirring the pot of soup on the stove. Takes guts. Most folks would have given up by now. I couldn't give up, Emma said softly, glancing down at Jack. He's my whole world. Sam nodded thoughtfully. That kind of love. It's rare. Don't let it go when you get back. I won't, she promised, her voice fierce. I'll never take him for granted again. By morning, the storm had finally subsided. The world outside the tent was eerily quiet, the snow glittering under the pale light of dawn. Sam stepped out first, scanning the horizon. Looks like we've got a window. Let's move. Emma helped Jack sit up, wrapping him in every layer they could spare. His eyes were clearer now, though his movements were slow and unsteady. You okay to walk? She asked, her hands cupping his face. I'll be fine, he said, though his voice was hoarse. As long as you're with me. She smiled, her throat tight. Always. With Sam leading the way, they began the arduous trek back toward civilization. The fresh snow made the journey slow and grueling, but Emma never let go of Jack's hand, her determination unwavering. As the sun climbed higher, the faint sound of a helicopter broke through the silence. Sam stopped, shading his eyes as he scanned the sky. Looks like the cavalry's finally here, he said, waving his arms to signal the search team. Emma's heart leapt as the helicopter drew closer, its powerful blades kicking up snow as it hovered above them. Moments later, rescuers descended, their shouts barely audible over the noise. Emma held Jack tightly as they were lifted into the helicopter, relief washing over her like a tidal wave. Inside, she cradled Jack's face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. We're going home, she whispered. Jack managed a weak smile, his eyes filled with gratitude. Home, he echoed, with you. As the helicopter soared over the snow-covered mountains, Emma closed her eyes, resting her forehead against Jack's. They had faced the impossible together, and now nothing could break them. Their love was a force stronger than any storm, and as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. The steady hum of the helicopter filled the cabin as Emma held Jack's hand tightly, her fingers entwined with his. His head rested against her shoulder, his breath slow and even, though every so often he would shiver despite the thermal blankets wrapped around him. Emma kept glancing at his face, searching for any signs of pain or distress. You still with me? She whispered, brushing his damp hair away from his forehead. Jack's lips curved into a faint smile. Barely? He rasped, his voice weak but teasing. But I'm not going anywhere. She pressed a kiss to his temple, her relief momentarily overwhelming her. Good, because you owe me a million apologies for making me come out here. His chuckle was hoarse. You've got it. First thing when we're home. The medic sitting across from them leaned forward, his expression professional but kind. How's he holding up? Emma glanced at Jack before answering. He's lucid, but he's freezing. Is there anything else you can do for him? The medic nodded. We're monitoring his vitals, and the blankets are helping. The moment we land, we'll get him into a hospital. You both did an incredible job keeping him alive. Emma's eyes stung with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. We didn't come all this way just to lose him now. Jack opened his eyes, gazing up at her. Hey, he murmured, his voice softer now. I'm right here. You didn't lose me. She squeezed his hand, her voice thick. Don't scare me like that again, Jack. I mean it. No promises, he joked weakly, earning a sharp look from Emma and a laugh from the medic. As the helicopter approached anchorage, the city lights shimmering below, Emma felt the tension in her chest start to ease. They had made it through the worst. The moment they landed, Jack was rushed into the hospital, leaving Emma pacing the waiting room, her heart pounding with every passing second. Sam appeared by her side, his rugged face calm but reassuring. He's in good hands now, he said, sitting beside her. You did everything you could. Emma nodded, though her hands wouldn't stop trembling. I know, but I can't lose him, Sam. I don't know how to do this without him. Sam placed a firm hand on her shoulder. You won't have to. He's tougher than you think. Minutes felt like hours until finally a doctor emerged, pulling off her gloves as she approached Emma. Mrs. Taylor? The doctor asked. Emma shot to her feet. Yes, is he okay? Can I see him? The doctor smiled gently. He's stable, severe hypothermia and dehydration, but no permanent damage. He'll need time to recover, but he's going to be fine. Emma let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her. Thank you. Can I see him now? The doctor nodded. He's awake and asking for you. Emma didn't wait for more details. She practically ran down the hallway to Jack's room, her heart pounding. When she pushed open the door, she found him sitting up in bed, looking pale but alive. His eyes lit up the moment he saw her. Emma? He said softly, his voice stronger now. She crossed the room in 3 steps, throwing her arms around him. You scared the hell out of me, she said, her voice breaking. Jack held her tightly, his hand brushing over her back. I'm sorry, he murmured. I never wanted to put you through this. She pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. Don't you dare apologize. You're here. That's all that matters. His eyes searched hers, filled with gratitude and love. I can't believe you came all the way out there for me. Emma laughed, her tears spilling freely now. Did you really think I wouldn't? Jack, you're my whole world. I'd go to the ends of the earth for you. He leaned his forehead against hers, his voice thick with emotion. You're my world too, Em, and I don't think I'll ever stop thanking you for saving my life. Then start by getting better, she said, smiling through her tears. Because you're never getting rid of me. Jack laughed softly, his grip on her hand tightening. I wouldn't dream of it. As they sat together, the tension of the past few days began to fade, replaced by a quiet certainty. They had been through the unimaginable and come out stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They always had. And now, more than ever, they always would. The hospital room was quiet, save for the steady beep of the monitors tracking Jack's vitals. Emma sat by his bedside, her fingers laced with his. The warmth of his hand was a comfort, a reminder that he was here, alive, and recovering. Outside the window, the world was blanketed in snow, but inside, there was finally a sense of peace. Jack stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Morning, he croaked, his voice still hoarse. Emma smiled, leaning closer. Morning. How are you feeling? He gave her a weak grin. Like I went a few rounds with a bear, but better. Good, she said softly, brushing his hair back. The doctor said you're doing great. A few more days here, and we can get you home. Home, he murmured, his eyes far away. That sounds good. A knock at the door interrupted them, and Sam stepped in, his hat in hand. Hope I'm not intruding, he said, his voice low. Not at all, Emma said, waving him in. Come on, you're practically family now. Jack's gaze shifted to Sam, a faint smile tugging at his lips. So, you're the guy who kept her safe. Sam chuckled, pulling up a chair. She didn't need much help. Your wife's tougher than she looks. Jack's smile grew. That doesn't surprise me. Emma rolled her eyes, though her cheeks flushed with pride. I couldn't have done it without Sam. He's the reason we found you. Sam shrugged. Just did what anyone else would have. That's not true, Emma said firmly. Pot, you went above and beyond. I'll never forget what you did for us. Sam cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. Well, I'm just glad you two are okay. That's what matters. They fell into an easy conversation, Sam sharing stories from his time as a ranger, Jack chiming in occasionally with his dry wit. The atmosphere was light, a stark contrast to the tension of the past days. Emma found herself laughing for the first time in what felt like forever. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Sam stood to leave. I'll be heading back to my place tomorrow, he said, but if you ever need anything, you know where to find me. Emma stood and hugged him tightly. Thank you, Sam, for everything. Jack extended a hand, his grip firm despite his weakness. I owe you too, more than I can say. Sam tipped his hat. Take care of each other. That's all the thanks I need. After Sam left, the room felt quieter, but not empty. Emma sat back down, her hand returning to Jack's. He turned his head to look at her, his expression serious. Emma, he said softly, I've been thinking about everything you went through to find me. I'd do it again in a heartbeat, she said without hesitation. I know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And that's what scares me. I never want to put you through something like that again. You didn't put me through anything, she said firmly. This wasn't your fault. Jack shook his head. Still, I've spent the past few days thinking about all the things I haven't said, all the things I've taken for granted. You've been my rock, Emma, my reason to keep going. And I don't tell you that enough. Her throat tightened as tears filled her eyes. You don't have to tell me, Jack. I know. Well, I'm going to start anyway, he said, his grip on her hand tightening. Because I don't want a single day to go by where you don't know how much I love you. She leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips. You don't have to prove anything to me, Jack. Just get better, and let's go home. His eyes softened, his smile faint but genuine. Home with you sounds perfect. That night, as Jack drifted into a peaceful sleep, Emma stayed by his side, her heart finally feeling light. The worst was behind them, and the future, for the first time in days, felt full of hope. The sound of footsteps in the hallway echoed softly as Emma sat by Jack's hospital bed, her fingers intertwined with his. Outside, the morning light filtered through the snow-dusted window, casting a warm glow on the sterile white walls. Jack had finally regained some color in his cheeks, and though he still looked exhausted, there was a spark of life in his eyes that Emma hadn't seen in days. Any news from the doctor? Jack asked. His voice still raspy but stronger than before. Emma smiled, adjusting the blanket over his legs. She said you're making good progress. A couple more days, and we'll be discharged. Jack leaned his head back against the pillow, exhaling a long breath. Finally, hospitals aren't exactly my idea of a good time. Emma chuckled softly. Well, next time you decide to go missing in the Alaskan wilderness, I'll make sure to book us a suite. He grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Noted. No more wilderness adventures without a 5-star backup plan. Their laughter was interrupted by a knock at the door. Claire, Emma's best friend, stepped in, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. Her eyes lit up when she saw them. There you are, Claire exclaimed, setting the flowers on the bedside table. I've been trying to get updates from Emma, but she's been impossible to pin down. Emma stood, hugging her friend tightly. It's been a little chaotic, she admitted. But we're okay now. Claire pulled back, her gaze shifting to Jack. And you, Mr. Taylor, are officially a miracle. How are you feeling? Jack gave her a lopsided smile. Like I've been hit by a snowplow, but better than I did a few days ago. Good, Claire said firmly, crossing her arms, because you have no idea what Emma went through to find you. She practically turned into a one-woman search and rescue team. Don't remind me, Emma said with a groan. I still haven't caught up on sleep. Jack reached for her hand, his expression softening. I've got the best wife in the world. I don't deserve you. Damn right you don't, Claire said, smirking. But somehow she still puts up with you. Emma rolled her eyes, though her cheeks flushed. All right, enough ganging up on Jack. He needs rest. I'll behave, Claire said, holding up her hands in mock surrender. But seriously, Emma, you're a hero. And I'm so glad you're both okay. After Claire left, the room grew quiet again. Jack turned his head toward Emma, his gaze lingering on her face. She's right, you know? About what? Emma asked, raising an eyebrow. You being a hero, Jack said simply. I don't know how you did it, how you found me. I didn't have a choice, Emma said, her voice soft. Jack, the thought of losing you, I couldn't let that happen. I would have gone to the ends of the earth to bring you back. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You already did. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything they'd been through settling between them. Finally, Jack spoke again, his tone more serious. Emma, I've been thinking about something. She tilted her head, curious. What is it? When we get home, he began, his voice steady, I don't want to just go back to how things were. I want us to take that trip we've been talking about, the one to Italy. Emma blinked, surprised. You're serious? Absolutely, Jack said. Life's too short to keep putting things off. We've been so focused on work and routines. I want more of this, time with you, making memories. No more excuses. Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, but she smiled. I'd love that. Just promise me you'll pack better next time. Jack laughed, squeezing her hand. Deal. The rest of the day passed in quiet contentment, their plans for the future providing a sense of hope and excitement. For the first time in days, the weight of fear and uncertainty began to lift, replaced by the warmth of love and the promise of better days ahead. The morning of Jack's discharge was bright and clear, the sunlight streaming through the hospital windows as Emma helped him into a thick winter coat. He moved slowly, still regaining his strength, but his determination to leave was palpable. Ready? She asked, her hands lingering on his shoulders as she adjusted the collar. Jack smirked. I've been ready since the second I got here. Let's go. She smiled, slipping an arm around his waist to steady him as they made their way to the exit. Outside, the crisp Alaskan air hit them, and Jack took a deep breath, savoring the fresh scent of pine and snow. I forgot how good fresh air feels, he said, leaning into her slightly. It's like I can finally breathe again. Emma looked up at him, her heart swelling. You'll feel even better when we're home. Sam was waiting by his truck, leaning against the door with a familiar, no-nonsense expression. He straightened when he saw them, giving a curt nod. Good to see you up and moving, he said to Jack. Jack extended a hand, his grip firm despite his lingering weakness. Good to be moving, and good to finally thank you in person. You saved my life, Sam. Sam shook his head. I just helped your wife. She's the one who wouldn't quit. Emma blushed, but Jack pulled her closer. That's why I married her, he said, his voice soft but full of pride. All right, Sam said, gesturing to the truck. Let's get you two to the airport. Storm season's not over yet, and I'd rather not have you stuck here longer than you need to be. The ride to the airport was quiet but comfortable, the three of them trading small talk as the snow-covered landscape rolled past. Jack occasionally glanced at Emma, his expression a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. She caught his eye once and smiled, squeezing his hand. At the airport, Sam helped them unload their bags, his movements unhurried but precise. He turned to Emma, his expression unusually serious. Take care of him, he said simply. I will, Emma promised, her voice steady. Sam then looked at Jack. And you, don't make her come chasing after you again. Jack laughed softly, nodding. I'll do my best. As they said their goodbyes, Emma hugged Sam tightly, her eyes glistening. We couldn't have done this without you. Sam tipped his hat, his rugged face softening. You two take care of each other. That's all that matters. The flight home was long but uneventful, the hum of the plane a soothing backdrop as Jack dozed beside Emma. She watched him sleep, his face finally peaceful, and felt a wave of relief wash over her. They were going home, together. When they landed in Seattle, the familiar sight of the city skyline brought a lump to Emma's throat. She glanced at Jack as they made their way out of the terminal, his steps steadier now. Feels good to be back, he said, his voice quiet but content. Yeah, Emma replied, her smile wide. It does. As they approached the car, Emma hesitated. Jack, wait. He turned to her, his brow furrowing. What's wrong? She stepped closer, cupping his face in her hands. I need you to know how much you mean to me. I don't think I've said it enough. Jack covered her hands with his gaze steady. Emma, You've shown me more love in the past few weeks than most people experience in a lifetime. I'll never forget that." She blinked back tears, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just so glad you're here. And I'm not going anywhere," he promised, leaning down to kiss her softly. The drive home was quiet, both of them soaking in the familiarity of the city streets. When they finally pulled up to their house, Emma's breath caught. Jack reached for her hand. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, smiling. More than ever. As they stepped inside, the warmth of home enveloped them. Emma turned to Jack, her heart full. "This is it," she said. "A new chapter." Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "And it's going to be the best one yet." The first night back home felt surreal. The warmth of their house, the familiar creak of the hardwood floors, and the soft hum of the heater working against the chill outside. All of it wrapped around Emma like a comforting blanket. Jack sat on the couch, a mug of hot tea in his hands, watching her move around the room as if she was trying to reassure herself that everything was just as they had left it. "You don't have to clean, you know," he teased, his voice carrying the familiar warmth that had been missing for too long. "The house didn't run away while we were gone." Emma rolled her eyes but smiled. "I know. It just feels strange, like I'm trying to shake off all the chaos from the past few weeks." Jack set his mug down and patted the spot on the couch next to him. "Then stop moving for a second and sit with me." She hesitated for only a moment before joining him. As soon as she sat down, he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "This," she whispered, "this is what I missed the most." Jack rested his chin on her head, his voice soft. "I missed it too. I thought about this, about you, every second I was out there. It's what kept me going." Emma tilted her head up to look at him. "I don't know how you did it, Jack. Surviving out there alone, in that cold, it must have been terrifying." "It was," he admitted, his gaze distant. "But I kept thinking about you, about coming home. It was like a thread I just kept holding on to, even when things got bad." Her throat tightened as she reached up to cup his face. "I was so scared I wouldn't find you." He leaned into her touch, his eyes softening. "You're the reason I'm here, Em. You gave me something to hold on to when I didn't think I could make it." They sat in silence for a while the weight of everything they had been through settling between them. Finally, Jack spoke again, his tone lighter. "So, about this Italy trip." Emma laughed, the sound breaking through the heaviness like sunlight through clouds. "You're really not going to let that go, are you?" "Not a chance," he said, grinning. "We've been talking about it for years, and after everything, I think we've earned a little adventure, a warm one this time." She raised an eyebrow, smirking. "You're sure you won't forget to pack appropriately?" Jack feigned offense, his hand over his heart. "I'll have you know I'm now an expert in survival gear." "Good," Emma said, her smile softening. "Because if we're going, I want it to be perfect." Jack leaned in, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "It will be. As long as I'm with you, it always will be." Later that evening, Emma lit the fireplace, the flickering flames casting a warm glow over the living room. Jack stretched out on the couch, his head resting on her lap. She ran her fingers through his hair, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I don't think I've ever appreciated this house as much as I do now. It's not just a place, it's us. It's everything we've built together." Emma nodded, her eyes glistening. "It's home, and I'll never take it for granted again." Jack reached up to take her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "Neither will I." As the night deepened, the weight of the past weeks seemed to melt away, leaving only the quiet, steady certainty of their love. Whatever storms they faced in the future, they knew they would weather them together. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their home and each other, everything felt right. The morning light poured through the sheer curtains of their bedroom, painting the walls with a soft golden hue. Emma woke first, her gaze falling on Jack, still sound asleep beside her. His face looked peaceful. The lines of exhaustion and worry from the past weeks finally softened. She smiled to herself, brushing her fingers lightly against his cheek. Jack stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw her, a slow smile spread across his face. "Morning," he murmured, his voice still rough from sleep. "Morning," she replied, her hand lingering on his face. "How are you feeling?" He stretched slightly, wincing as his muscles protested. Better. Sore, but better. She leaned down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Good, because today, we're starting fresh. Jack chuckled, propping himself up on one elbow. Starting fresh, huh? What's on the agenda? Yoga and green smoothies? Emma laughed, swatting at his arm. Not quite, but I was thinking we could spend the day doing whatever we want. No plans, no responsibilities, just us. Jack tilted his head, considering her words. You mean like a date? Exactly, she said, her eyes sparkling. We haven't had one of those in forever. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Then let's make it a good one. An hour later, they were in the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling pancakes filling the air. Jack insisted on cooking, despite Emma's protests. You just got out of the hospital, she said, standing by the counter with her arms crossed. Shouldn't you be resting? He turned, flipping a pancake with an exaggerated flourish. This is resting. Besides, I owe you breakfast in bed for the rest of our lives after everything you've done for me. Emma rolled her eyes, but her smile gave her away. Fine. But if you burn anything, I'm taking over. Jack raised an eyebrow, smirking. Burn? Me? Never. They ate at the small breakfast nook, the morning sun streaming in as they laughed and talked about everything and nothing. For the first time in weeks, it felt like life was normal again, or maybe even better than before. After breakfast, Jack surprised Emma by suggesting a walk. She hesitated, glancing at him skeptically. Are you sure you're up for it? It's cold out and you're still recovering. I'm sure, he said firmly, pulling on his coat. I need some fresh air, and I want to see the garden. Emma smiled, grabbing her own coat. All right, but if you get tired, we're turning back. The garden was quiet under a blanket of frost, the last remnants of autumn leaves clinging to the trees. Jack paused by the small bench near the rose bushes, running his fingers over the armrest. This is where we had our first big fight, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Remember? Emma laughed, nodding. You wanted to plant tomatoes, and I said they'd ruin the aesthetic. And then you planted them anyway, he said, grinning, and they actually looked pretty good. She nudged him playfully. I was right, as always. He turned to her, his smile softening. You usually are. They sat on the bench for a while, their hands entwined as they watched the sunlight dance across the frosted leaves. Jack's voice broke the silence, low and thoughtful. You know, being out there, it changed me, he said. When I thought I wasn't going to make it, all I could think about was you, and it made me realize just how much I've taken for granted. Emma looked at him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. Jack, you've always been the most important thing in my life, and if this has taught me anything, it's that I need to make sure you know that every single day. He squeezed her hand, his gaze steady. Same here. No more taking life, or each other, for granted. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. We've got this, Jack. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The day ended back in the warmth of their living room, a fire crackling in the hearth as they sat curled up on the couch. Jack had a notebook open in his lap, scribbling something down as Emma watched curiously. What are you doing? She asked, peeking over his shoulder. Making a list, he said, grinning. All the things we're going to do. Italy is at the top, obviously, but there's more, like finally fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen. Emma laughed, shaking her head. Big dreams, huh? Hey, every dream counts, he said, his tone playful but sincere, and we're going to make them all happen. As the firelight danced across the walls, Emma felt a deep sense of peace. They had been through the unimaginable and come out stronger. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain: they would never let go of each other. Together, they could face anything.